Whistleblower Center. I've been representing FBI whistleblowers since 1993. The first speaker today is our keynote, Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa. Senator Grassley has been the main voice in the United States Congress on behalf of FBI whistleblowers and accountability in the FBI. I first worked with his office back in the mid-1990s on the Frederick Whitehurst case, who was a major whistleblower from the Bureau, the first to step forward. Senator Grassley's reputation for effectiveness and standing behind the whistleblower was such that at the very first meeting in which one of his staffers attended, when Fred Whitehurst was under a gag order by the FBI, I walked out of that meeting and I said to Fred, if Senator Grassley gets behind your case and stands behind you, you will win. And Dr. Whitehurst won his case. And Senator Grassley provided unbelievable support. He took to the Senate floor and he told the FBI, if you fire Dr. Whitehurst, you will have an oversight war. He said that on the Senate floor, making it impossible. His support checkmated the FBI. Since then, he has been consistent with supporting FBI whistleblowers, including those on the panel today, Colleen Raleigh and Michael German, and many other FBI agents. He is in the forefront, and his contributions have been exceptional. We can only hope that other senators will join with him and will finally get reforms at the FBI. I also want to mention briefly that it's not just the FBI that Senator Grassley has taken leadership roles on, but it's on many whistleblower issues. And for that, on Thursday, he will obtain a Lifetime Achievement Award given by 25 major whistleblower organizations altogether. And that will happen on Thursday. With no further ado, it's my great honor to introduce Senator Chuck Grassley.
Good morning, everybody. When I say everybody, I can divide some of you into friends, but not everybody that I would know, obviously. But I can say every one of you who are either a whistleblower or an advocate for whistleblowers, I can surely welcome you as a patriot as well as a friend. It's a great honor to be with you on Whistleblower Awareness Week and to have such a group in town to bring attention to the issues of whistleblowing. I think this events this week promoting and celebrating whistleblowers are important for all members of Congress and for the public as well, particularly when you say the public, because most every whistleblower I've been involved with are people who were concerned about the taxpayers' money being spent the way it was intended to be spent. And all whistleblowers are taxpayers as well. But whether it's their own interest or whether the interest of the entire country, very welcome, and the public would say thank you. By highlighting what whistleblowers do, we provide key insights into what it means to be a whistleblower and an important role that the whistleblowers, play in government and society, which I can best describe as being patriotic Americans wanting to do what government's supposed to do and making sure that the taxpayers' money is spent the way it was intended to be spent in a good management way. Whistleblowers, as I've observed in the 20-some years that I've been involved in listening to and protecting whistleblowers, they demonstrate a tremendous courage, sticking their neck out for the good of all of us. They don't take the easy way out by going along to getting along or looking the other way when they see wrongdoing. The grandfather of all whistleblowers is a person that maybe some of you recognize the name of, a person now in retirement, but Ernie Fitzgerald, who was Air Force oversight for a long period of time in the Defense Department. He described whistleblowers as being nothing more guilty of doing anything than, quote, unquote, committing the truth. Well, those of you who are whistleblowers and those of you that defend them know that committing the truth in a government bureaucracy does not always have good outturns. In fact, probably every whistleblower to some extent suffers, and too many suffer too much, and to some extent ruin themselves professionally. But they commit truth, and for doing it in their bureaucracy or maybe in government generally, they're about as welcome as a skunk at a Sunday afternoon picnic. Now, you've heard me say through 4 presidencies, and so after 4 presidencies, I'm not expecting this to happen, but I believe that the one thing that's really going to send a signal of whistleblowers being patriotic citizens and part of the system of government being responsible is when presidents recognize whistleblowers maybe once a year at a Rose Garden ceremony. Now, I've been advocating that through 4 presidents. So obviously I don't expect it to happen because I'll never be president. So it's going to take an advocacy, but I'm still in Congress, and I'm still going to be reminding presidents about that. Because I think that sending that message that I've referred to from the very top of the bureaucracy to the bottom of the bureaucracy, and the presidency is the top of that bureaucracy, you send a clear signal about the importance and value of whistleblowing as part of the process of checks and balances within our system of government. And not only would a Rose Garden ceremony send that signal and be good for the processes of government overall, the fact is that whistleblowers deserve that attention, and we ought to express a gratefulness for what they do and appreciate the very difficult circumstances they often have to endure to do so, sacrificing family finances, sacrificing their employability, and the attempts by powerful interest groups that smear good names and, without a doubt, good intentions. For over 2 decades, I've learned to appreciate and honor whistleblowers. As a senator, I've conducted extensive oversight into virtually all aspects of the federal bureaucracy. Despite the differences in cases from agency to agency and department to department, there is one constant, and that constant is we in Congress could not do our job of congressional oversight if we didn't have the patriotic help from whistleblowers, and particularly information and insights and paper trails and a lot of other information that we need to do our job of congressional oversight. So thank you for helping me to do my job as you put your life or your employment life on the line to come out of the shadows and tell us what's wrong. We don't suffer. You suffer for giving us information. You shouldn't have to. Laws ought to be strengthened to do that, but I'm even cynical as we pass new legislation, and hopefully we will, that somehow we can ever get laws well enough so that 100% of the people that know something's wrong will come forward, because you've heard those surveys about people that, yeah, they know about the laws that'll protect them, but they still aren't going to jeopardize. Every one of the whistleblowers that says, I'm not going to jeopardize, is setting in place an environment so government can continue to do something wrong or to waste money. So I'm cynical, but we still have to strengthen those laws. It's true that we're in a situation. Pardon me, I lost my when I shouldn't ad lib. Well, whistleblowers can help us truly understand problems with the culture of government agencies. This information and interpretation is vital to effective oversight. At the FBI, where I've focused much of my oversight efforts in recent years, agents who blow the whistle about problems or wrongdoing didn't have the same protections as other federal government employees. Congress has attempted to fix this problem with various versions of whistleblower reform legislation. One bill, S-274, already referred to, I'm a co-sponsor of, is currently pending before the Senate, and would address a number of the issues within the federal whistleblower laws that remain outstanding. I know that today you have on this panel two familiar faces here who are former FBI agents. Colleen Raleigh, who was born in New Hampton, Iowa, where my wife of 54 years was born, and graduated from the same high school as my wife, although she's 40-some years younger, and Mike German. Were FBI agents and our whistleblowers that provided valuable information to me in my efforts to oversee the FBI. I thank you all for your assistance. Just as other whistleblowers before them, these individuals deserve the support of Congress for bringing to light problems with the Bureau. Without their efforts, we may never have known the extent of problems at the FBI following the events of 9/11. So I hope that this week's events will allow the public to understand and rally around whistleblowers. Thank you all very much for the privilege of being with you.
Thank you very much, and Senator Grassley, and thank you for your efforts. I hope everyone here can attend the Lifetime Achievement Award that will be given on Thursday. His work, Senator Grassley's work, has included the FBI, but as he said, numerous laws and numerous other agencies. The first speaker today will be Colleen Raleigh. She worked for 24 years in the FBI. Her last position was as Chief Division Counsel in the Minneapolis Division. Like other whistleblowers, she had a distinguished career for many years until she raised concerns. And the concerns she raised went to the heart of the FBI's mission. Whether the FBI did everything it could do to prevent 9/11. Today we know they did not. But when Colleen Raleigh had the courage to step forward and report her concerns to the director of the FBI, to the Senate Judiciary Committee, to the 9/11 Commission, the American people did not know the extent of the institutional problems within the FBI and how those problems hurt every American. We cannot today say whether if they had responded to the issues Colleen and her associates in the FBI in Minneapolis had raised about Zacarias Moussaoui, whether that would have been enough to stop 9/11. We just don't know. But what we do know is that critical leads were not followed, just in Minneapolis and in other offices. We do know that the FBI did not adequately protect Americans, and whether that caused or helped facilitate the disaster on 9/11, because they didn't arrest those they could have arrested, we do not know. But Colleen Raleigh makes us know something. She made America know that the FBI can do and must do a better job. It's my honor to introduce Colleen Raleigh.
Thank you. And, you know, that Iowa connection, I didn't know it was so much Senator Grassley's oversight of the FBI that I got to stay in his office and use his bathroom for the better part of the afternoon waiting to testify. But I found out that my mother's was friends with Mr. Grassley's wife's cousin. So maybe that helped a little. But my story did not start with 9/11, actually, and it did not start with, of course, the memo afterwards. As a legal advisor in the FBI, I had lots of opportunities to spot these problems and issues and endemic things that occurred over time. And of course, now we all know after 9/11, one of the big problems was something called the FISA wall, this wall that prevented sharing of criminal intelligence with counter-espionage and terrorism-type intelligence. So Senator Grassley does a great service by saying that oversight's the key thing here. And if you do not have people in these positions who spot the issue soon, what you're going to end up with is a tragedy, is a scandal. And sometimes it seems like that's the only way to make a change. One of the things that I had spotted back in the early 90s was the fact that the FBI did not have rules prohibiting sexual relationships or cozy, close social relationships with informants. And of course, guess what? If you followed the news in about 2000, that did result in a scandal because the FBI was unable to fix that problem. So when 9/11 happens, and you see, as Bogdan Djokovic just mentioned, you see that the issue is not being addressed. The mistake itself is not being unraveled. And if it's not fully unraveled, how are you going to be able to fix it? We oftentimes reject accountability because, of course, it's a painful process. It's very painful to admit mistakes. It's very painful to even point fingers and say, you know, this mistake caused this. And sometimes it's complicated and it's diffuse. But if you don't engage in that process to unravel the mistakes, it's very difficult to fix the problem. And of course, what happens is people get promoted. Actually, some of the people get left in a position to continue making mistakes. And that's the worst of all things. In my case, I would say I was probably the most atypical whistleblower that, at least in the last several years, because I was mildly successful. My memo actually initiated an Inspector General investigation, a lengthy 2-year-plus investigation that was even more comprehensive than the Minneapolis office. It included the other two so-called dots that led up to 9/11. So it's about a 400, 500-page report, and as a whistleblower, it's about all you can hope for is to get that kind of comprehensive analysis. It figures into the authority for the 9/11 Commission. So I was successful in that respect. What I didn't appreciate writing the memo, I think most whistleblowers will say they're quite naive, and I believe that you know, first of all, I had no way of knowing that my memo would be classified. I'm the one who wrote it, and it was all public source information. Even the 2 words later that ended up after the fact being classified, French intelligence, was in the news. And so when I wrote this memo, but when I gave it to the Joint Intelligence Committee, and people started in the news to talk about it, it got classified. And it got classified for a reason, to keep the lid on. No one wanted to discuss again these problems. Even 8.5 months after 9/11, there was still a real strong battle against accountability and against unraveling these mistakes. But what happened is, in my case, I got the support. Senator Grassley, Senator Leahy. I was one of the, I think maybe to this day, one of the only low-level FBI agents who was allowed to testify directly to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And really without having anything I said in my statement previewed ahead of time by the FBI. And of course, you see that now going really in the opposite direction. You see rules and regulations, unprecedented, coming into being now to keep people at these lower levels from testifying directly. But I also got the support of my own Minnesota senators at the time, Wellstone and Dayton. And this points out one of the things with whistleblower protection is that other senators, sometimes your own senators, or perhaps a senator who has a particular area of expertise would be the senator that the whistleblower would naturally go to, instead of perhaps someone on the Intelligence Committee. And I got some media protection. Although the media protection, everyone knows there's unfortunately leaks now in the government, and I would contend that those leaks, which are a bad thing, are partially, unfortunately, the result of this really perverse situation we have. How do you do your job in government, serve the public, uphold the Constitution, when in fact you may have a boss or bosses above you that conflict with that? And it's very difficult, so then people do tend to try to do anonymous activism. And I think that if we can establish, if we can get whistleblower protection, freedom to warn is a key concept. If the freedom to warn our legislative branch of these issues and allow them to do their oversight, that actually then in the agency internally, it helps too, because it gives people courage in the agency to speak up to their supervisors. I don't know, a couple of years ago, there was a problem with the FBI's computer system, and it turned out that even within the agency, people were afraid to bring the bad news to the boss. And so you can see how this fear of reporting and this fear of talking about problems can actually even become into the agency. So we need the freedom to warn, and I will just quote with Lord Acton had that famous quote about power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Everyone knows that quote. He had a lesser-known quote, everything secret degenerates, even the administration of justice. And I think that is why open government, transparency, oversight of the legislative branch over the executive branch is necessary. Thank you.
I want to mention one other matter about Colleen Raleigh. Many of you know she was awarded by Time magazine one of the Persons of the Year in 2002. Although that might seem like an achievement given to her, as someone active in the whistleblower community for many years, I will tell you that before Time magazine ran that article, whistleblowers were treated and looked at one way. And after that award was given to Colleen and two other whistleblowers, the public perception changed. The environment changed for the better. And every whistleblower owes a debt of gratitude for what will come forward to Colleen and her two comrades who made it on that cover, because it changed public perception. We're not talking just the FBI now. We are talking public perception, because the American people were able to view the contributions that whistleblowers can give and how awful it is when they are silenced. Which brings me to our next panelist, Mr. Michael German. All I need to say that Mr. German is the Policy Counsel of the ACLU. And I should be able to sit down right now and end everything. In fact, we could probably leave right now with those few words. Why? He should be in the FBI, where he was for 14 years, where he was doing a brilliant job undercover fighting terrorism. That's where he should be today. He had no performance problems, no issues. He just raised allegations of misconduct in a terrorist investigation after all of the publicity about the misfaults of 9/11. And the FBI and their culture retaliated against Mr. German. And Mr. German used the process. He went to the Inspector General and they issued a report finding retaliation. Did that help him? They missed half of it, but they found retaliation, but he was still stuck. There were findings of and direct evidence of falsification of documentation. Was anyone held accountable? Mr. German had to leave the FBI because it's an environment that is so hostile to whistleblowers, and that is a shame, and that's one of the reasons we're doing Whistleblower Week. And I think I've introduced Mr. German now as part of my introduction, but with no further ado, and I can follow up if I need to, Mr. Michael German.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks, Steve. My story kind of came on the heels of Colleen's story, and really it could have been a good news story because the events that were taking place in the investigation I was involved in were happening in 2002, just as Colleen's memo was getting attention, and we were learning that there were significant problems in the way the FBI handled counterterrorism intelligence. And since I had fortunately, a good record of working counterterrorism cases, when I saw a problem, I thought this would be the opportunity to bring up the fact that post 9/11, the FBI was still not fixing its problems with the way it managed counterterrorism intelligence. And with the attention that Colleen was receiving, I thought it would be something that the FBI would recognize this is something we need to respond to. And as you heard the earlier panel today, I'm sure you listened to Bogdan's story about the FAA and TSA and how obvious threats to our security were brought to them and they turned a blind eye. And the same with Darlene, where obvious threats to our national security were brought to the Customs Department and they turned a blind eye. And I'm sure it's hard to fathom that. And it's hard to fathom how people who are in the FBI, in the FAA, TSA, would turn their eye away from what is such an obvious threat. So as a former investigator, I always want to look at the evidence. And fortunately, in my case, there's a great wealth of documentary evidence. The case was initiated when a supporter of an Islamic terrorist group here in this country met with a member of a domestic terrorist group, a white supremacist group, trying to establish operational links so that people who blended more in American society could do the work of the foreign group. The meeting had been recorded long before I had been involved in the case. They called me and asked me if I could do undercover work on the case. And I went down, saw that the case was a mess, and decided that I needed to try to get the case resolved. Again, this is post 9/11 when we should know that we have to respond to these cases quickly. Unfortunately, the case was not handled well, and when I reported problems, rather than fixing the problems, managers worked together to actually cover up the problems, which was stunning. And I'll quote from the Inspector General's report on the case. In December of 2002, the Tampa Division submitted a report to FBI headquarters based on my complaint, concluding that the terrorism case lacked investigative merit because the subjects had not discussed engaging in terrorist attacks. No discussion at the January meeting of money laundering or weapons sales. Now, what the Inspector General report doesn't say, the Tampa report also said, was the meeting was not recorded. They were actually hiding the tape recording. So at that point, I went forward with the transcript to show that indeed the meeting had been recorded and did involve discussion of terrorism. So the FBI Inspection Division opened an investigation. This is the second level of the so-called internal process to catch these problems. And I'll quote again from the Inspector General report. In November of 2003, the Inspection Division issued findings similar to the Tampa Division's report, concluding that there was not a sufficient nexus to terrorism and that a viable terrorism case had not been missed. The other branch of the FBI that's supposed to be the internal watchdog is an office called the Office of Professional Responsibility. They were who I actually brought my complaint to. And the IG report says, OPR officials told the Inspector General that they decided not to initiate a formal investigation of Mr. German's allegations because they believed that the FBI Inspection Division review would be sufficient. The lead inspector on the Inspection Division review told the OIG that they believed OPR had evaluated the misconduct and therefore weren't going to do their own investigation. So it's literally this Keystone Cops sort of approach. And you know, again, look at the date. Their report came out in November of 2003. This is a case that had started in January of 2002. So we're now more than a year beyond when this investigation should have been running. I finally, the Inspector General also wouldn't open an investigation, so at that point I decided to leave the FBI, and they said they would open an investigation, but it wasn't moving forward, so I finally decided that it was time to sort of step up to the plate and report to Congress, and I reported to Senator Grassley what was going on, and fortunately Senator Grassley's office took the information. I wasn't able to provide them with any documentation. I just told them what I knew, and luckily he took just literally face value what an agent was saying to him was going wrong, and stood behind me. And I appreciate so much that support. The FBI did not stand behind me, though. After I resigned, they actually went on television and said, in asking about a connection between domestic and foreign Islamic terrorist groups, it did not exist. There was not a coming together of those groups. Literally went on television to say that, and actually issued a press release that said their investigations had found no information to support allegations that the subject was involved in terrorist financing, or that there was an apparent link between a domestic terrorist organization and an international terrorist organization. Well, Senator Grassley's office didn't leave it at that, and they have an incredibly capable investigative counsel, Jason Foster, who I'd like to point out in the room, who this comes from a 16-year veteran of the FBI, the best investigator I ever met, continued to pursue the case, continued to document by document get records from the FBI about the matter, and ultimately got a copy of the transcript. I had never, in my whistleblowing, tried to get anybody to believe me. All I asked them to do was look at the evidence. And in this case, there was a transcript. So fortunately, just last couple of months, in March of 2007, Senator Grassley issued a statement at an FBI oversight hearing. After years of effort by this committee, the Judiciary Committee, the FBI finally provided a transcript of the meeting, and it flatly contradicts statements made by Bureau officials in trying to downplay the incident and discredit Michael German. The transcript clearly shows white supremacists and Islamic terrorists and Islamic militants talking about building operational ties between their organizations. According to the transcript, these two groups also discussed shooting Jews, their shared admiration for Hitler, arms shipments from Iran, their desire for civil war in the United States, their approval of suicide bombings, and assassinating pro-Israeli journalists in the United States. And this was all the first time they met. Now, what would cause FBI officials in the Tampa Division, FBI officials in the Inspection Division, FBI officials in OPR, and the Inspector General all to conclude that this transcript indicated no connection to terrorism? I mean, it's really sort of stunning to think that this could go through that level of review and nobody would see what obvious is plain on the paper. And I think that's something that we have to understand as we move forward, to understand that these internal processes that are built to protect the national security, that are built to provide some sort of oversight within the agencies are not sufficient, that there has to be outside oversight, because without the determination of Jason Foster and Senator Grassley to get to the bottom of this information still wouldn't be known. And fortunately, unfortunately, it took until March of 2007, something I had reported in September of 2002. So, 5 years later, the information is out there and now is hopefully moving through the intelligence stream so that people will understand what the threat is and take advantage of the intelligence that they do have. Because, again, you can't connect the dots if you're unwilling to see the dots on the paper in front of you. So as all the whistleblowers come up and speak to you, keep in mind that it is true that people will look at something and they would rather go with what their bosses in the bureaucracy tell them to do rather than what's obvious on the paper in front of them. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
We are going to have a brief question and answer period, but before we get to that, there's a little handout that the Whistleblower Center that I put together for today's seminar, which all of you should have. If not, they'll be available. And there's a chart of comparing the legal protections for FBI whistleblowers compared to whistleblowers under 20 other federal laws. And this will help, I think, solidify or explain why congressional action is needed, why there's tremendous support for H.R. 985 that passed the House and we want to get it through the Senate. This is what happens. This is what whistleblowers like Kohn, like Michael, and others face. If they have the courage to blow the whistle, here are their legal rights. Just so you know, Congress said they should be the same as other federal employee rights. But the President of the United States issued an order delegating all protections for FBI whistleblowers to the Justice Department and gave the Justice Department the authority to set them up. And the Justice Department, I guess they were recruiting some new U.S. attorneys or U.S. attorney hopefuls. Here's your rights. Do you have a right to call a witness to your hearing? No. Can you get compensatory damages? In other words, if they smash your reputation in the law enforcement community, you can't get a job when you're at your mandatory retirement age? No. Do you have a right to a hearing? No. Can you go before an independent judge? No. You have the right to go to the Office of Attorney Recruitment and Management. That's right. A political appointee, attorney recruitment. And they actually do recruit attorneys. And they'll give you what they give you. No judicial review. Do we need H.R. 985? On that optimistic note, if anyone would like to ask any of the panelists a question, please either come to, I don't see a microphone, so just speak loudly and I may have to repeat it. Is there a microphone? There's a microphone there.
Yes. Do either of you have any explanations on why the FBI has not taken as seriously as they should both these threats from violent Islamist and white supremacist groups? Is there any religious or philosophical or practical reason why you see that this is not being dealt with properly?
Is that working? You know, I wish there was a philosophical reason behind it, because that would make it more explainable. I mean, it's literally just incredible incompetence at managerial levels and mismanagement, and that's really what it's about. You know, in looking at my report, what could the FBI decide? They could decide that they have this huge problem among management in their Tampa division where they're actually falsifying evidence and hiding evidence of terrorism cases, and terrorism intelligence is being missed. Or they could say they have one problem with one agent who's gone off the reservation. So if you're an FBI manager, what's easier for you to tell your staff and your superiors? That this one agent doesn't know what he's talking about, and hide the evidence and continue to perpetuate this myth that this transcript didn't say what it said. And you know, that's really, to me, more of a frightening issue than whether or not there was some philosophical issue. The fact that even after 9/11 and all the lessons learned, that they're still willing to hide the ball from the public.
Colleen?
And just in a general way, not on that specific question about Islamic, the terrorism threat, when you find a mistake, many times a mistake is so obvious, everyone will know about it. This issue of the sexual relationships and the cozy social relationships with confidential sources was going on a long, long time, and many, many people knew it. But what happens is when that problem is identified, there's so much intransigence to fixing it, because number one, someone's going to have to admit it was wrong to begin with. The same thing with crime scene evidence, which actually came up in another case where items from 9/11, and you can just think about it. There was, of course, one case was identified where some items were taken from 9/11. But guess what? Donald Rumsfeld himself had a piece of the plane. So you had this, and certainly we had people in the FBI at high levels that had, over the years, just because it was an obvious policy problem, but many people now would have to admit that mistake. So I think sometimes you get set up just in this environment where it's impossible for accountability without a whistleblower.
Yeah, and what I'd like to add, and that's, I'm going to touch on that subject of the theft, but in another FBI whistleblower case, the case of Bassem Youssef, a unit chief in counterterrorism, he still works there, I'm representing him now, we deposed the person in charge of Middle Eastern counterterrorism on the day of 9/11. #1 manager. Question: do you know the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite? No. Question: was there any difference between the 9/11 bombing and a bank robbery? No, just a crime. Question: what about was there a difference between the Oklahoma City bombing and the attack on the World Trade Center? No. His exact quote: a bomb is a bomb. This man's level of ignorance as to Middle Eastern counterterrorism was beyond, not just acceptable, but was so shocking that just take it from there. That was the top. In terms of theft from 9/11, that was the case of Jane Turner. Agents were actually stealing property from a crime scene in violation of numerous laws. The investigation showed about 40 or 50 people had taken or received these goods. No accountability. Next question.
James Manship, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Naval Reserve. Whistleblowers are patriots. And when I took my oath of office, I said I would protect and defend this Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There's a situation where there's a branch of the FBI that's supposed to essentially do oversight of local police. And in the city of Alexandria, right across the way, there's a Nice versus City of Alexandria, where a policeman raped a woman 4 times. And the Commonwealth attorney refused to prosecute criminally because we don't like to put our policemen in jail. And then the city used sovereign immunity to defend itself against any sort of prosecution, even on the civil basis. That seems to me to be a domestic enemy, where there's also been the many other things in the city of Alexandria where they have offended and killed citizens of Alexandria. And yet the FBI or any other appropriate agency seems to be blind to this threat to our society. I'd like to ask you what you think we should do as whistleblowers to try and get responsibility there. Thank you.
Civil rights investigations have always been a big part of the FBI's jurisdiction, and in part it's because it's, you know, these are fundamental rights, and it is part of the enemies of the Constitution that civil rights have to be protected. Unfortunately, in the past, since 9/11, and I know that there are news reports to this effect, resources have been transferred more to international terrorism, and it is reported that civil rights investigations have taken a back seat, just in terms of resources, as have, for instance, even some white-collar fraud cases. So these are the things that should be, you know, we talk about oversight. These are exactly the questions, though, that can languish for years. There are little games that they can play with the resources that make it look like something's being investigated. In fact, Congress mandates a certain number of man-hours for things like healthcare fraud. And of course, if the congresspersons who are regulating that have no way of knowing what really is going on, then they have little way of oversight. So,
yeah.
Actually, there's Syracuse University has a program called the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, TRAC, and they have been using Department of Justice records to show what's actually happening. You know, it's almost a public oversight sort of function. And if you look at their website, you'll see that all prosecutions are down, including international terrorism, down below 2001 levels. So, you know, that is one thing that I think the public has to become more aware of, is that despite all the money, despite all the extra powers that the FBI is being given, their product is not, doesn't show any improvement. And that's something that's very important for everybody to recognize.
Thank you, Mike.
Jim Murtaugh. Wonderful talks. I was when you talked a little bit about the computers, as a citizen trying to work with the FBI on an investigation, it's quite shocking. They don't seem to have email. A whole district investigation would have one email, and nobody would read it. You'd bring them an email threat. They would claim they wouldn't know how to trace it. Has the computer problem been solved there? And why wouldn't people think that the FBI needs reliable computers?
Well, of course, we know with this massive collection of intelligence, and I've talked about too many dots, actually, because before 9/11, some people said it was like a fire hose, you can't get a drink. That's how much intelligence we had. Well, if it was a fire hose before 9/11, it's Niagara Falls now. And it requires computer technology then to help us to pinpoint those dots, whatever relevant dots there are. And of course, that's a problem. I don't think the FBI's computer system has been fixed. There have been contracts that have gone south. And what I was alluding to when I was talking is the fact that for a period of months, the boss of the FBI was not even apprised of how this contract was working to update the computers. Now, that is a serious problem if even the bosses themselves are not talking. So I think that it still remains a problem.
He didn't realize he didn't have an email address himself, or that would be pretty obvious, I would think. I don't know.
They're very expensive contracts, too. So the millions and millions of dollars that have gone, more or less wasted is a serious, for people like Senator Grassley who care about taxpayers' money. This is a huge issue to have the taxpayers' money spent.
Well, we'll get them free Yahoo email addresses, and I'm sure they'll donate. It'll be great.
And one thing I'd like to add is after 9/11, there's been this idea that, the intelligence agencies need more secrecy. I mean, part of the veto threat against the whistleblower bills we've talked about is if there's any breach in the secrecy, our national security will be at risk. Well, take a look at the Inspector General's report on the FBI's National Security Letter Authority, because that is a window into what happens when a wall of secrecy is put around a program. And if you look at that report, what you'll see is just an extraordinary level of incompetent management of a very sensitive power that they were given to demand records on anybody they wanted to, and increasingly it's being used against Americans. And, not just poor record keeping, but intentional misconduct with the use of this power. And again, that's just a small window into what goes on behind closed doors within these institutions.
Okay, given the time, I'm going to do 2 more questions, but you have to keep them very, very brief.
Okay, my name is Jeff Feuden. I'm the founder of the Veterans Affairs Whistleblower Coalition. I've actually spoken to both of these folks by email and met Mike in 2005. I was sort of taken aback by one of the comments, actually, Steve, that you made, and that is, it wasn't a surprise to me that the FBI and national security whistleblowers need at least the protection that other federal whistleblowers have. The whole reason, one of the reasons I started this coalition of Veterans Affairs whistleblowers is after I spoke to Sibel Edmonds, who many of you know, I contacted her because I saw lots of press releases where she said, national security whistleblowers absolutely need the same federal protection that other people have. Well, guess what, folks? We don't have it either. All right, the Office of Special Counsel, MSPB, we don't have it. If we did have it, I wouldn't have 2 to 3 to maybe 5 physicians, nurses, pharmacists, all sorts of healthcare providers contacting me constantly from coast to coast. Now we've got over 60 people involved with our organization that affects ultimately our veterans. That's a crime. So there is no protection.
And just in summary, the 3 numbers, 985, H.R. 985, let's get it through the Congress this term.
And if anybody would like a button, by the way, we have these nice little buttons that say promote quality veteran health care, support VA whistleblowers. Thanks.
And we'll have time for one last question.
Although neither of you are still insiders at the FBI, you're a lot closer to that world than the rest of us. Can you share us your reading whether things have gotten better or worse inside the FBI for those employees whose first loyalty is to the public and their mission rather than the chain of command since 9/11?
Well, I'm still contacted from time to time from people, and I'm aware of continuing horror stories of people in the FBI that have been retaliated just for really essentially doing their job. I think one thing, to talk about the cup being half full, I think Senator Grassley was in part responsible in helping get a little more oversight outside of the FBI into the IG instead of self-policing our Office of Professional Responsibility. So there have been some things over the years that have gone in the right direction.
You know, one thing I always try to do when I talk about the FBI is to make a distinction between the agents out on the street who really are doing the best they can under the circumstances that they're given to protect society and to keep us all safe. But they do need your help. And they need to know that if they come forward with something, they will be protected. Because, you know, something like my example shows them that even if you do have a career that's full of success and that you've never been in trouble, they still will drum you out. So, unfortunately, my lesson is probably not one that would encourage anybody in the FBI to come forward.
And in closing, I would ask our panelists if they have perhaps 1 minute, if they'd like to share anything that they think that American people should do or the direction that they think needs to go to make the FBI accountable and make sure that it does the job it's paid to do.
Well, you know, the story of Sarbanes-Oxley was that it wasn't just the crash of Enron that got that law to pass. It was a 1-2 punch, Enron, WorldCom. And unfortunately, these are serious tragedies in terms of people losing their life savings that brought about that law passing. I think if you listen to the staff people who talked about the history of getting the law, the bills now at the point they are, 330-something to 90. Listen, if we can't mobilize and get everyone out to push this year to get this passed, especially in the environment we are now, it is going to be one long time. I think this is the year.
Right on.
I can't improve upon that. I'd just like to say, you know, for those out in the public, you have the right to demand accountability from these agencies. They do not have a right to keep what they're doing secret from you. You know, this is government of the people, and we should make sure that our members of Congress are conducting aggressive oversight. I mean, I wish there was more senators and congressmen like Senator Grassley who's willing to, you know, do the hard work and maybe not make some enemies on the other side of those institutions. But he's doing it for the good of America and the good of the American people. So thanks again to Senator Grassley.
Well, I want to say thank you to our panelists, and I think a warm round of applause for the contributions they have done to make America safer. Thank you.